Okay. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for attending our webinar today with Dr. Kevin Giangrasso. And Kevin, thank you so much for coming back. This is sure to be a wonderful discussion. And again, on behalf of the Ridgewood Public Library, we're very happy to see so many of you attending. Again, this is a very poignant topic that I know many of us are dealing with kids. And again, just so you know, we're going to be discussing managing school stress for middle school parents. And for those of you who might not be able to stay for the entire webinar, that's totally okay. It is being recorded. And for those of you who may have friends who could not attend but were interested in attending, you are welcome to share that recording after the program. The email with the recording will be going out as soon as this program is done. So you are welcome and encouraged to submit your questions through the chat feature. And Kevin will be able to see those. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Kevin Giangrasso. Kevin?
Thank you so much, Ashley. And I'm glad. I wish I could see all you, but I can't. So thank you for coming tonight. I think what I'm going to try to do, I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'll go through, but I think it's also really helpful if, as I'm talking, you send questions in, because that way I can address what you're really looking to get answered tonight. And thank you also for everybody who sent questions in ahead of time. I will do my best. I'll probably do a mix of just moving through the slides and trying to address the questions as I go, and also, here and there, answering a question as it comes in. The other thing I wanted to say is that tonight I'm going to be focusing on a really developmentally interesting group of middle school students, but we're also going to do one of these talks in October and another one in November, and the upcoming talks one will be related to high school students, and the other will be elementary students. So one of the things I'm going to try to do tonight is talk about the things that the stress management techniques and the stressors that we're all dealing with right now, sort of through a developmental lens, and that's where we'll start. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to share my screen. Actually, I think that it says host disabled attendee screen sharing, so I'm not able to do that for some reason.
All right, give me 1 second. I'll give you that permission.
No worries.
All right, you have been made the co-host, so you should be good to go.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so okay, so Ashley, can you just verify that what you can see is the
screen. You are good to go.
Okay, great. Okay, so just very quickly a little bit about me. I'm a licensed psychologist here in New Jersey and New York. I work primarily with children and adolescents and their families. As you can imagine right now, there are a lot of atypical issues that are coming up because of physical distancing, because of quarantine, because of hybrid learning. And all of these issues impact kids who are in middle school and their families. So as I talk today, there's a few concepts that I want to just highlight. The first is this developmental lens. And what I mean by that is when we talk about difficulties or we talk about stress or anxiety or worry, and we'll talk about the differences between those three in a little bit, stress, anxiety, and worry. We want to, whenever possible, try to look at the ways that people experience and the ways that people manage those things through a developmental lens. So it's as if we're wearing a pair of glasses, and those glasses give us the ability to get inside our middle schooler's head, heart, and body, so that we sort of understand a little bit more from their perspective, and thus we're able to help them manage the difficulties that they're experiencing. The second is that when we're talking about stress, we're talking about at its core, we're talking about someone who isn't sure if they're going to be able to handle the thing that is causing the stress. So at the heart of it, we're talking about uncertainty, and we're talking about anticipation of a negative outcome. So I would call that anticipatory worry, anticipatory anxiety, and stress by definition is something we're experiencing now, but it's really about what's to come in the future. And if we're uncertain about what's to come, that makes us feel uncomfortable. I think also when we're talking about coronavirus, COVID-19, and everything surrounding it, we're really talking about loss. We are all going through a time right now where we're coming to terms with different losses that we're experiencing in our lives. Loss of the ability to see our acquaintances and friends in person, loss of loved ones, potentially, loss of the experiences in a variety of ways that we thought we would have had. So we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. I think it's also important to talk about resilience. We are built with the ability to build resilience. We all are. But I think kids and early adolescents in particular are able to learn those skills that help them to be resilient people. And by resilience, I mean being able to have the skills to get through difficult experiences in life. And then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about what I would call, or what has been called, a solution-focused approach. So solution-focused therapy is a particular modality of therapy, but I think taking some of the philosophy that underlies that approach and applying it within the family, or applying some of those same techniques to basically solving the problems that we're confronted with. And right now we have a particular set of problems. We're talking in particular about stress and related difficulties. But this type of process of finding workable solutions and being really practical about it has wide-ranging potential. So I have a lot of questions on these two slides, most of which came in on registration. I'm gonna go through some of these questions, take a look at what they say, and try to see if any of these questions, if you share any of these questions. We'll also get to these questions at the end again, and hopefully through this discussion in this presentation, I will have answered most, if not all of them. I will say these are questions that can't be fully answered, and I think we should recognize that. These are, what we're talking about tonight is really ways of managing stress, In other words, making it less intense and making it into less of a barrier for our children. And that's a process that unfolds over time. So one of the big themes here is that I saw in the questions is the concern that, and I think it's particularly true of middle school. Middle school is a time, is developmentally a very wide range of developmental levels and developmental milestones. It's 3 or 4 years that are hugely important for development, and there's a very large amount of change that happens during that time. And generally, and which I think is accurate, I think generally we understand in-person interaction, social interaction, as one of the key drivers of that development. And so I think one of the themes is, well, how can we help our kids to make those huge strides, to reach those developmental milestones that we want them to reach during middle school, when they're home for part or all of the school week. And we sort of all, I think many of us have the feeling that online learning or sitting in front of a screen and interacting just really isn't the same. It doesn't have the same richness that in-person interaction has. And so the question is, how can we encourage that development? How can we encourage that healthy balance for middle school kids when we're isolated in this way? Middle school is a big time of peer pressure as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. How do we make new friends? Another theme here, and I think in most of this is something common in a lot of the different conversations and talks that I have. The question of when is it a clinically significant problem? So if my child is isolating and playing video games many hours during the day, as a dad, I'm going to ask the question, well, is this okay? Do I just let him or her do this for a couple weeks or throughout the period of isolation and just kind of get through it? Or is this indicative of a larger problem that I really need to seek professional help for? And those are questions that often it's hard to answer, but I will refer to a few guidelines of things that if you notice, it is helpful to get consultation around. And I will also say that I think, we parents have if it's mom, refer to maybe like momdar or daddar. So this gut sense that something just isn't right, or gut sense that something qualitative has changed in my child's behavior. I would encourage everybody who's listening, whether you're a grandparent, a parent, an uncle, an aunt, to trust that gut as one of the sources of data to understand how the child is doing. It's not the only source of data, but it's a very important one. And so if it seems like something as significant has shifted or changed qualitatively in how your child is interacting or how acting, or maybe something in their mood, I would pay attention to it. Another piece is, will my child fall behind academically? I want to give a sort of a quick answer to this one right now, which is, I think that we're probably going to see some uh, some drops in academic levels after last spring and this fall, and how school, or we might, in how school, how children are performing academically. Um, my sense overall is that that's going to be a pretty short-term thing, and that kids will bounce back. So I've had a number of people ask or bring up the idea that, we're going to have a generation of adults who are missing key academic concepts, or are in some way behind in knowledge, in their knowledge base. I don't think that's true. I think that learning and development is based on a lot of ups and downs, and if we were to graph uh, uh, if we were to graph child development and lifespan development, um, the path is a bumpy road, right? And this is certainly a big bump, but I don't think there are going to be really sustained impacts that you're going to be able to see across a population at all. But that being said, it might be difficult to readjust to full in-person classes when we end up there again. Okay. Okay. I'm just talking to myself, don't mind me. Okay. So first, I want to talk a little bit about middle school development. As I said, it's a huge range. The just entering sixth grader is very different developmentally than the eighth grader who's graduating in the spring and ready for high school. You can see it physically in size, you can see it in behavior, and from a cognitive perspective, you can see it in the way those different ends of the middle school age group interact with each other and with the world. As a general rule, over the course of middle school, kids are becoming more aware of what's happening in the world. As part of that, as I think we all know, middle schoolers it is perfectly normal to start to question authority and start to ask the questions of, well, is this right? Is this right or wrong? And start to take action against things that they don't agree with, or rules or expectations that they don't agree with. They don't take everything at face value. They're able to start to really develop their sense of values of, this is important to me. Things like concepts like integrity, or fairness, achievement, these types of concepts. Middle schoolers are cognitively more able to grasp onto them. Right in the middle, that bullet point, they're able to think about how current actions affect the future, and they may worry about world issues. I think there's a confluence between that developmental reality and what we're experiencing right now with coronavirus. This is an example of a situation that has has thrown off the world in a way that's different than realities like war or famine, or these large scale difficulties, because it's impacted everybody. And the combination of being able to, and coming into their own in their ability to think about how what we do today impacts the future, may contribute to stress for the middle schooler. So often we talk about the area of social emotional wellness. development happens. There are sort of, it's a bidirectional relationship between what a middle schooler, or what any human biology is moving them towards in terms of steps of development, and that interacts with the experiences they have in the world. And so we talk about social emotional development as this concept of, well, we need to have experiences to cultivate, to help move forward the development that is naturally happening for us. I'll just list them: peer pressure, bullying. The idea is very big in middle school, the imaginary audience. It's this this untrue idea that someone is always watching. And you may remember it when you were that age, or you can, if you can picture a middle school kid walking into the cafeteria at lunchtime, a lot of times nobody's looking at them, or they don't know that anybody's looking at them, but they're actually looking away, or looking a little bit, like walking a little bit awkwardly. That's probably because they think everybody in that room is watching every movement that they make. That's stressful. That's a stressful experience, but it's also quite normal for this age group. They can be moody. They actually probably need more alone time and space, because they're trying to work out a lot in terms of who they are, who they want to be, and the changes that they're experiencing. As part of that, they're gonna try new things and try to be differently in the world at this time. So let's take those milestones, and for a minute think about, through a developmental lens, how middle schoolers might be experiencing the current changes in our society. So grief is one. We all have had a lot of changes in our families, in our work life, in our social spheres, because of the things that are going on. A lot of that involves loss. And I think it's important that we acknowledge, and I think people are starting to talk about this a little bit more openly, the grief process that we're all going through. We grieve not just people, but we grieve the loss of experiences, or we grieve the loss of connection with others. These are the famous stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross originally came up with, but they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And you can, if you're more interested in this topic, certainly you can Google this stuff and learn more about the process of grief. But the point I want to make tonight is that middle school kids are likely going through that similar grief process, but they're doing it as middle schoolers or as emerging adolescents. And if grief is typically sort of a ping pong process that takes us all over the place, ultimately to a point where we can accept the loss and move on with the other parts of our lives that we want to move on with. It's a ping pong game in a tornado or a hurricane for a middle school kid, because they have a lot of changes already, and they're dealing with loss of childhood. They're all of a sudden they're realizing that they're not a kid anymore, and the world is not as safe as they expect it to be. And at the same time, they want to be adults and they want to make decisions. And that's this back and forth process. And now they're in an experience where even their teachers don't know how they're going to be teaching in, 3 months. They didn't fully understand how to plan the school year this summer, because there was so much uncertainty, so much that was unknown. And so I think it makes it harder, but it also gives us an opportunity to model for kids that that sort of everybody is going through that process and trying to figure it out together. And it's not a clean process. It's not an easy thing. But that as a family, or as a unit, as a community, we can try to stay together and stay at the same table and try to figure these things out together as we all go through this processing of loss. And a little bit of extra patience and understanding at this time, I think, makes sense. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Anybody have any questions at this point? And I would say my main point thus far is, or one of the things that I hope is a takeaway from tonight, is that if we understand from their perspective what they might be going through, because we're thinking about development and their development, we can help our kids to better manage their stress and better feel connected and well balanced because of it. Which is a segue to resilience, because resilience is a set of skills. We are not necessarily born with resilience, but we are born with the capacity to continually develop resilience. The way that we think, the way that we act around difficult situations has the potential to teach us how strong we are to deal with, process, and move on from difficult experiences in the future. If we go into this school year and this quote situation that we're in with the mindset that we can learn from it, we can make meaning from these experiences that we're going through as a family and as a community, I think we give ourselves a good shot of developing that resilience to deal with the stress that comes from this difficult school year that we're gonna be going through. These are really the components, I would say, of resilience. Resilience is about feeling connection with others, with feeling a holistic wellness. From a cognitive perspective, having the mindset that we can get through and even grow from difficult experience and make meaning from it. Always, as an adult who's taking care of children or adolescents, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first before you put it on your child. So that is to say, use what you know to honestly deal with your own stress, and that will serve both as a model for your middle school student, your middle school child, and it will also help you be more present to understand their perspective so that you can help them. And that doesn't mean that you have all the answers. So model coping. If you show an example of someone who's not quite sure of what the answers are, but they're trying to figure it out, and you end up figuring it out, you actually probably teach a more important lesson than if you had said you knew the answer or shown the answer from the beginning. Okay. I'll hit on this. So I think we often are aware of how we feel about things, or at least the initial reaction feeling that we have. But I think often what underlies our emotional reaction is the way that we're thinking about any given situation. And this is particularly true of stress. Stress is hard to deal with. Stress is a difficult thing, but it is also something that grows because we continue to be to focus on it. Of the way we think about the thing that's causing the stress. And if we work on identifying those thoughts that are unhelpful, and this is not to say if you're feeling stressed or you're feeling angry or you're feeling frustrated to go to the opposite end of the spectrum and pretend that you're happy or pretend that it's something that it's not. No, far from it. But it is about trying to reduce the intensity maybe of those feelings, and by reducing the intensity of some of those thoughts. We also are made up of biological realities, psychological realities, and social realities. And so from a biological perspective, if we're only getting 3 hours of sleep each night, or our child is only getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep each night, then that's going to impact their level of stress. That's going to impact their physical well-being. It's going to impact a lot of different things. But that's primarily a biological influence. Psychologically, how we think and feel and act about the world. If we're stuck in patterns that are unhelpful, that's going to create more stress in other areas. And socially, I think this is a big source of uncertainty, because so much of our social interaction is starting to be online and modalities like we're on right now. But that doesn't mean we can't have social connection. I would say, things are, quote, opening up a little bit and will continue to do so, hopefully. But we also understand that, we have some data about this pandemic and about this virus itself, that being outside is probably a pretty good way of reducing the risk. And so we probably can do a lot of social interaction outside. And we want to try to be creative about how to get our kids into those situations in a safe way. Again, it's all a balance, but it's important to try to figure out ways to boost quality social interaction as a way of helping our middle school kids to thrive and to be resilient. And I just said something that I wanted to just touch on. I'm talking about quality social interaction. So I do think that we can look at the types of interactions that kids are learning from, or learning about themselves from, or learning about the world from, and we can sort of put those in a quality social interaction category. And then there are other things that maybe are less less helpful or less healthy. With this group in particular, as kids get into middle school and get a little bit farther into middle school, we actually we have less of an eye on all of the nuances of the social interactions that they're having. So we don't always know what's quote quality and what's not. But we should keep that in mind, I think. Solution-focused approach. So I think that it's very important to be practical. I think it's very important to look at, I referred to data or emotional data before. It's important to look at the data, to look at how your child is doing. What is their mood like? How are they talking? Are there any changes that are happening? And also look at ways that you can help that, and work more on the things that that you can change, and try to be more flexible about the things that you know that you can't. So in a solution-focused approach, you want to make a goal to change something, but you actually probably want to make it small, because you want to make your goal of, so as an example relevant to this talk, having your helping your child to meet a new friend. That's an attainable goal, but you don't want to make that goal into helping your child to meet 10 new friends. No, you want to work on one at a time and think about ways that maybe in your immediate neighborhood or other groups that they're involved with, to help facilitate them meeting new people and making new friends. And by the way, if that means a little bit more time on FaceTime or some friends like friend calls, I think that's okay. But you want to make your goal small and meaningful. You also want to know when you've achieved that goal and when not. So you want to make it specific, so that you know if you've gotten there or not. And every 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old has lived that number of years, and no matter who you are or who they are, they've had experiences in their life when they've been successful in overcoming a challenge, because that's the nature of growing up. It's the nature of development. It is really helpful often to look back on things that you as an adult have done well and try to like do that again, or try to figure out what worked the last time and try to replicate that. And it's also helpful for you to help your child to do the same thing, rather than trying to get the focus off of, I'm frustrated because I'm not going to be able to be in school for as much time as I was, or I have to stay 6 feet away from the kids that I'm meeting. How am I supposed to, make a new friend? I'm going to be so embarrassed because I can't, do what makes me feel good in front of them, like play baseball or, I don't know, ride my bike. But there are other ways that I've been successful, and figure out how to get there. Okay. I wonder if right now, so we have about, what is that? Ashley, am I right? 18 minutes left?
Yes. We have a little bit more time, though, if you wanted to answer some questions. And for those of you who are listening in, the Q&A is where you can type your questions, and we'll see them there.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, I wonder if if there's anybody, so I sort of listed this this set of 2 slides of questions. Is there anybody in the audience who would be willing to write in the Q&A section, like the question that they're sort of burning to kind of talk about or hear about, if there is one? And then I would start there. And if nobody does, that's okay too. But I thought that might maybe give me some direction on which question to kind of talk about a little bit more. Okay. Oh, that's so exciting. Thank you for asking that question. Okay. How much is too much? Oh, great. The questions are coming in. Thank you. Thank you, guys. So how much is too much? So the person who asked that question, is that about screen time or is that about something else? Oh, okay. And then while you answer that, oh, TikTok. Oh, about TikTok, of course. Okay. Thank you. How much is too much? Okay. So the question is about the app or program, whatever you call it, TikTok. How much is too much? So I think the answer to that question lies in the norms of today. So it's very hard to answer that in a number of minutes or hours, because I don't think there is an answer to that. And the norm for kids is to use Snapchat, TikTok, these types of apps like all the time, and it can actually end up being helpful and a really good way, a really like healthy way to interact, sharing dances back and forth and that kind of thing. I think all that being said, so that was like a non-answer, but I will, to actually answer the question, when it's becoming a barrier to other things that child has to do. So it should never be like TikTok or homework, for example. However you feel about homework as a norm. The expectation for your child is that they complete their homework, and it's going to have implications for their grades. So when it's getting in the way of that, then that's a problem. Or socially speaking, if there is a way that you've noticed that your child tends to be on TikTok and it actually keeps them away from opportunities to interact because it's just more fun or easier, then that's too much, I think. So I think the question is about when TikTok or any similar app becomes a barrier to other requirements of a middle school kid's life. And feel free to write in the Q&A like, okay, that was helpful, or to give an add-on question to that. Okay, can everybody still hear me? Yes, I think so. So the next question I have here is, how can we address the topic of speaking to our kids about others who are not social distancing? Thank you so much for bringing this up, because this is something that I had in my notes to talk about tonight, and I didn't get to it. And this is something that I think it's a real concern, because when you think about developmentally, when you think about middle school kids, right, they're starting to
understand more about the world. They're starting to understand power and authority more. And they're also starting to play with their ability to flout the rules, or to, deny their importance. And social distancing, wearing masks is a perfect way, quote perfect, but really scary way for kids to play with pushing back on the rules or expectations. I think one of the ways to address this is really within honest and open conversations with your middle school kid, and honest and open conversations about understanding if they share how they feel about it, like if they're annoyed by the mask or they miss hanging out with their friends and, I don't know, being close on the basketball court or something like that. So validating that feeling, but at the same time, making sure to make a point about values and the reason that we do social distancing. So in my view, the reason that we stay physically apart from people is because we care about others, we care about our family's health, and we care about our community's health. And if we can refocus on what makes us a good friend, or what makes us a good, strong, good, and independent person, is being able to stick with rules even when they're uncomfortable, then I think we start to see kids actually making really brave choices to be the one who is observing physical distancing, or the one who is wearing a mask when others won't, and trying to be a leader. And that's I think that's a value that a lot of middle schoolers want, but are afraid that they're not able to have, which is leadership. Hope that's helpful. Next question is, oh, thank you. My son is usually very social, but in this isolation has made him less inclined to meet new people. So this is such a common concern right now. He worries about the virus and potential of getting exposed. Should we give him the space to figure it out, or keep nudging him to come out of his current shell? Those last two questions, should we give him space to figure it out, or keep nudging him to come out of his current self? I'm going to give a really maybe annoying answer. Yes to both. I think there's a balance that's required to push emerging adolescents, to push them out of their comfort zone, so that they have the experience of success that they maybe fear that they can't have. But they also need space. So there are going to be times when you push your son, and maybe it feels like it went a little too far, or he gets frustrated, or he gets hurt socially because you pushed him. In the grand scheme of things, it's better to have that experience than to give him too much space, or so much space that he avoids. And one way I think about this particular area is, I think that coping and avoidance are on a continuum. And so and the behavior is the same. The behavior of being to yourself, or giving yourself alone time, or time to do something that is away from the stress of social interaction, that can be coping. In other words, it can be something that's really healthy and good to do. It can also be avoidance, which is something that's less healthy and creates more stress in the long term. Because if we avoid something that we know we're going to have to deal with eventually, it just snowballs, it gets bigger. If we cope with something that we're having difficulty dealing with, we give ourselves a few minutes or a day to let it sink in, to reflect, but then we go out and we deal with the thing that's causing the stress. So I think we want to encourage coping by teaching, giving some space, but that space shouldn't last for weeks. It should last for a day, or maybe, depending on the situation, maybe an hour. That space, and then you want to kind of push exposure, or be a little bit anti-avoidance. What should you do when you notice your child shifting friend groups during middle school? How do you get your child to tell you more directly what's going on rather than everything's just fine? This is like, thank you for these questions. These are really awesome. Sorry, I'm just closing the window. What should you do? So first of all, shifting friend groups during middle school, you couldn't find a more normal developmental experience than that. That's actually that's a really good thing, even if it's painful for your child in the short term. That it goes right with, the developmental milestones that I mentioned, right? Trying to figure out how to contribute, trying to figure out where their place is, who they want to be in the world. A natural outgrowth of that is shifting friends. My friends when I was a young kid just don't seem like a good fit for me anymore. So I'm going to try out new personalities or new personas with others. That's normal. And being told everything's good or everything's just fine is also extremely normal. And I think the way to get more data or get more information from your middle school kid is to practice listening and catching them at the right time. So pushing enough so that they know that you care, they know you care and would want to hear what they have to say, and then putting the brakes on the questions and just kind of trying to listen when they do start to talk. So whenever they start to talk, to not overreact, try not to be judgmental with them, because that's going to be looked at through a magnifying glass in a middle school kid. Any level of judgment, they think, well, everybody else in the world thinks they're a horrible person, and you may have just said, well, is that the best friend for you? Well, they might hear that very differently. So I guess to be direct, the answer is, if your child's friend group is shifting, I think that's normal, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it may be a good thing. To know what's going on, to practice listening and finding those little moments when they really want to share, and trying to reinforce that by just being a listener and just being really relaxed about it and non-judgmental. Okay, so I wanted to address. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. This is so fun to get these questions. It feels a little bit more interactive, and that feels good. So thank you for typing in those questions. And if anybody has more, please go ahead and write them in. I wanted to address the differences between three terms that we throw around a lot, and I think it's important. I think they're important because I think it helps us understand the behaviors and the reactions that are going on. So the three terms are anxiety, stress, and worry. Those are very related experiences, but they're different things. Stress, by definition, is something that it's that feeling of discomfort when there's something external that's causing the stress. And so for it to be stress, when that external thing that's causing the stress goes away, so does the stress. The stress goes away. So if I'm stressed about an upcoming exam, or I'm stressed about, so middle school, I'm like romantically interested in another student. I might be stressed about that. But when I ask her on a date, or I divulge that I like her, and she reciprocates that, that stressor is over, and all of a sudden I feel better. Well, that's stress. Or it's not reciprocated and I'm disappointed, but the stress is still over because that question is answered. The external, the thing that is causing the stress is over. So that's stress. Anxiety, by definition, is a similar experience, except when the stressor goes away, the feelings continue. That's the difference. And that's what we call anxiety. So that's a little bit more, it's a little bit more intense. It's a little bit harder to deal with, because you can't just remove the stressor. You can't just do the thing that you're stressed about and then it goes away. Well, someone with anxiety does the thing where the stressor goes away, but they still feel the same. They still feel anxious. And the approach is similar, except I think that's something that is more likely to benefit from professional consultation. The third term is worry. And worry is, I think, a helpful term because it addresses part of the experience of, an aspect of the experience of stress and anxiety. Worry is more of the cognitive experience, so the thoughts associated with the stress or anxiety. So if I'm worrying, I'm thinking specific things that are going over and over in my brain. That's worry. So worry can be a component of stress, or it can be a component of anxiety. I hope that's helpful. I think I'll end with this next piece. So one of the questions that I wrote on the slides is when to seek professional consultation, or what are, I guess I think a lot of parents wonder, or a lot of parents worry about, how do I know if this is, quote, really serious, or this is a significant problem that needs intervention of some kind, which, by the way, is not always professional consultation. Sometimes it's, asking another family member, an uncle, an aunt, a cousin, or friend, to kind of take another look and, like, are you seeing, as adults, are you seeing this the same way I'm seeing it? So some of the concerns that often come up in this age group are kids who become obsessed about the topic of COVID, or health generally. So kids becoming overly worried about dirt or contaminants, or people being hurt or people being killed. And the word obsessed is there. I think it's probably an overused term, but very, very worried about health in a way that they weren't before. I think many of us going through this experience of COVID and the pandemic, we sort of develop a little, like, colloquially speaking, like, we develop a little bit of OCD. We're using a lot more hand sanitizer, we're cleaning a lot more, and all of that stuff. But this is a little bit different. This is becoming, having recurrent worry thoughts about these things. lamenting restrictions. So being really, really upset about the restrictions that are imposed. Seems anxious. So this could be just observing anxiety, or the way they sit. They always sit sort of in a tense way, or they just seem more anxious. Or if they start taking on parent or adult responsibilities, like it seems like they start to feel like they have to handle everything in the home. Some recommendations to help with those things. Sometimes limiting some news exposure is helpful. I think for this age group, it's also helpful to have open and honest conversations about what's going on, because the worries that your middle school student is having might not be the worries that you think they're having. So listening to them is helpful to understand where they are and where their brain is. Try to discourage the talk of future scenarios. So try not to contribute to more uncertainty or what ifs. And you want to model, you want to show them that there are ways, even in the midst of a difficult time, to be calm, to be reassuring, and to use all those coping skills. If you exercise or do yoga or do any sort of healthy thing for yourself, to show that to them. And also to be clear about what your responsibilities are as an adult versus what their responsibilities are as a child or emerging adolescent, a teenager. To take some things off their plate if you feel like they're trying to take on too much. All right. I will just say thank you to everybody for coming to the talk tonight. I hope it was helpful. If I think Ashley is going to send out a summary in the video, please do share it if you know anybody who would be helpful for.
Yes, thank you so much, Kevin. This was wonderful. And again, I will be sending out the recording of this presentation once it all saves. If anybody has questions, I'll also include Kevin's email address. If there are further questions that you'd like to ask him about, you're welcome to email him. And again, thank you so much, Kevin, and I hope everybody has a great night. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.